Welcome, everyone. My name is Chris with National Parents Organization, and today I'm here with Teresa Harlow, who is an author, a speaker, and a collaboration champion. And she's got a new book out, and she's here to tell us all about the book and tell us a little bit about how she got into working with families and dealing with shared parenting. So, Teresa, welcome, and thank you for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Chris.
So, tell us a little bit about yourself. I mean, how did you get involved with with parents and working with parents and collaboration and all this sort of stuff?
Yes, I've been a co-parent, divorced parent for about 21, 22 years now, and also a step parent for the better part of the last 14 years. And as that journey would suggest, I've lived this. When my then husband at the time and I decided that divorce was the path for us, he said to me, Teresa, you're going to miss half of your son's life. And, while I had thought through a lot of how we would look as a divorced couple, I really hadn't thought about how the divorced family functioned and what that exactly meant. I had thought about it in more of a general sense, but not those specifics. And when he said that, I was a little bit taken aback and thought, I have to solve for the idea of losing out on half of my son's life. He was only 6 years old at the time, and I wasn't entertaining the idea of missing out on half of that parenting experience. So I set out to, solve my own problem in this regard so that he and I, my son's father and I, could collaborate and be in the same venues together as our son came up through sports and music and all the things that parents want to both be there for. I didn't want there to be the awkward scenarios that you hear so many parents, play out, where one parent can't be in the room with the other parent and kids have to keep them separated. And so I didn't want to see that as our future and my son's future. And I came upon our solution, which really ironically came from my childhood, from things my mom had taught me, how to interact with others and how to treat others. And she had told me, Teresa, and everybody's heard this, right? If you've got nothing nice to say, don't say anything, right? And I'll be honest, my son's father and I had long before that abandoned that principle. And so I thought, okay, well, I've forgotten that one. So let's try to start there and, stop throwing the verbal knives at each other. And let's see how far that takes us. But being realistic, that obviously you can't be silent the rest of your life. And you do need to communicate with this person. Even if you've decided your romantic relationship is over, you still have to talk through various parenting aspects. So I went a little bit deeper with that and came upon another thing, or remembered another thing that she had taught me, which was, Teresa, treat others the way you want to be treated. And I'm like, well, now we're on to something, because I don't know how necessarily he wants to be treated, but I certainly know the kinds of things I would want someone to say to me or not say to me. And so I thought, if I can just reintroduce these types of things into my behavior, let's see where that takes us. And as I did that, Chris, amazingly, he began to reciprocate that behavior toward me as it regarded our parenting. So it really enabled us to be collaborative and just dismiss all of those other emotions that surrounded our previous relationship as a couple and focus more on being good parents and helping each other to really be good parents. With that, other parents said to us, boy, I wish my parents would have done that for me, because it was hell on wheels for us. And, I was like, well, it really wasn't that hard. And we would have other parents say, I want to be able to do this. And so, I shared this message with them, and I saw from all sides of this, good and bad outcomes that kids were having to experience, and the parents too. Nobody wins when someone's not getting along in a family, right? We all know that from other family conflicts we've had. And so I decided to put it down in a book And this is actually my second book on the topic of co-parenting. In this book, I go a little bit deeper in exploring combative behaviors that, frankly, go beyond the relationships I've personally been part of, to really address what do you do when you're in a conflict scenario, or that you become conflicted. And so that's the idea of why I wanted to do this. I really just wanted to save others some of that learning by maybe helping them get there more quickly by sharing my experiences, and to highlight for them some of the things they may not realize are derailing them, or that don't have to derail them if they're on the victim end of that.
Yeah, I think a lot of parents, really don't realize how enmeshed they are emotionally, still with their ex significant other, right? And how much that influences their interactions with that person. And I mean, because you make a lot of memories with these people, and then all of a sudden, now you're kind of on different sides of the fence, but you need to work together for this common goal. It's really hard, right?
Yeah. Well, a friend of mine a long time ago said, and this was, I think I was still with my son's father at the time, and this guy was getting divorced, and I said, "Oh, I'm really sorry to hear that." He said, "Oh, don't be sorry. We had some really good times together. I uh, got together with her because I loved certain things about her, and those things haven't changed. And so we're going to take away from that relationship, and we're not going to destroy those photos that I'm going to carry with me that are always going to be positive things." And I thought, wow, that's a really different perspective that I hadn't considered, because usually you hear is it okay to even like an ex spouse? I mean, are you
Yeah,
violating some kind
absolutely.
of code? So,
Yeah, and I think it's great whenever that. I think it's great whenever people can do that, but I think there's a lot of relationships. Like I said, they're still enmeshed emotionally, and it's really hard to have a good, co-parenting relationship when you're still enmeshed emotionally. So, can you tell us a little bit about what's some examples with co-parenting, and how you can reduce combativeness with that?
well, so remembering that it's not a competition is a big one. So a lot of times parents will focus on, well, and part of it comes out of a fear of maybe losing time with the child, that they want to please the child, they want to be their friend, they want to make sure that they win at the parenting game, and that they come out looking the best. And so rather than focusing on it being this competition between you and another parent, think of it more as a partnership. And obviously the romantic partnership's over, but the family partnership, the parenting partnership, it survives that. And so it's a matter of, how do you want that to look after you're divorced? Do you want it to
Sure.
look combative? Do you want to model that behavior for your child? Or do you want to put forward an example for them that you would want them to then later in their life emulate? So focusing on being that good parent and enabling your other partner in parenting to be the best they can be by giving them information, by giving them the time they need with the other child, by being flexible when that makes sense. And then also making sure that the two of you have laid out some specific guidelines, so that when you do have conflicts, you don't have to go at it, but you can refer back to something that you've already talked through and can use as a reference to kind of reground you guys in something that's not necessarily going to turn into an argument, but rather, oh, let's look at what we said about that before. So co-parenting plans are a big, big thing.
So, what's the most disturbing, disruptive behavior that you've seen, and what's the fix for it?
Well, there's varying degrees of that. Like the most extreme example, I think anyone would probably agree, is I actually have a friend whose ex abducted the child. They went for a visitation. It was court ordered visitations, and he never came back with them. And he fled the state. And so she hired private investigators and had to over the course of, can you imagine, like 60 days or so that she was without her child, not even knowing if he was safe. So that's extreme, it's criminal. And, I mean, that's probably the most difficult thing I've actually had a friend share with me that they've had to come through. Um, the on a more common scale, if you will, would be the manipulative behaviors, intentionally trying to make another parent look bad. And I think that's what a lot of NPO is about, is that parental alienation and how to, not have that happen. So, I have a real soft spot in my heart for any parent that has that happen to them. I had a very good friend who I saw the other parent really systematically trying to eject them from the life of their child. And I just don't know, Chris, what the parent thinks they're gaining out of that. Again, are you winning if that's the outcome for you? Or have you just lost maybe a parenting advocate, someone that could be on your team and help you get this very difficult job of parenting another human being done?
Yeah, I think
So,
I think a lot of times, the parents get focused on, what they're going, what their post-divorce life is going to be like, and they kind of go to this, Armageddon scenario, and so then they go to fight for their life, and
right.
of course, there's always money to fight over, and time with the kids, and who gets to make decisions, and the courts certainly don't make this easy, because they don't start in the middle a lot of times, and so it creates this combative atmosphere. But you're right. I don't think a lot of parents really think through, what is the end state going to look like, and oh, by the way, I have to work with this person for how many ever years until the kids turn 18, right? So I think they
At least.
all forget about that. Yeah, and then afterwards. So I think the courts really aren't helping, and we're at MPO. We're focused on trying to change the laws so that things are more fair, and we've seen that when shared parenting is introduced, that people are less combative, and there's less issues around the combativeness, right?
Yeah.
So it's better for everyone, but certainly a lot of parents don't think about this at the beginning. They just sort of set up in war mode, and then they go kind of scorched earth, and don't
Right.
really think about what are the consequences. Well, if you burn everything down, there's going to be nothing left to regrow, right?
Yeah, and in the defense of those that start down that path, it's not necessarily out of a bad intention. I mean, I think a lot of it is what they feel like is a defensive maneuver, if you will. Like, they're afraid they're going to lose their child, so they do all these things to try to build up their defense, so that if something does get thrown at them, they've got a whole list of things they can pull out and touche. And it's like, the whole time you're focused on that, what if you focused instead on making sure the other parent, could do this parenting job well? Because how difficult is it for someone to stay mad at you if you're constantly helping them? I mean, really, it starts to disarm someone. And I'm not unrealistic here. I know that some people will not respond to that, or maybe it'll take many times. You may not get a good response the first time. They may think you're up to something if you start treating them nicely all of a sudden. But if you do it over time, and remember, this is not because necessarily you're motivated to treat them nice. You're motivated by the idea of wanting them to be a good parent as much as you want you to be a good parent, so that your child and all of you have the existence that you strive for, and a happy life.
Yeah, I think it's so important to really focus on what's the future state when you're going through all this, because you mentioned alienating behaviors before, and I certainly know there's intentional alienation, and then there's those behaviors that parents have that are unintentionally alienating. They're not even aware they're really alienating their other parent until it's pointed out, and then the parent has an option, right? They can either choose to change their behavior and not do that anymore, which is the right thing to do, or they can continue to do that behavior, which is damaging. So
Yeah.
I think it's important too to point out that there's sort of you get in this defensive mode because things in court. A lot of times we'll, there's a lot of untruths that come out in court just to try and gain an advantage, right? And then so people get in a combative mode, but then, once the court stuff sort of dies down, you get into that alienating behaviors, and there certainly are intentionals, and then there's certainly unintentional. So I just wanted to see
Yeah.
what your thoughts were about that.
Yeah. There are. And that's actually why I decided to do this second book. One of the things I think is true is that people, we get triggered emotionally by things, right? And sometimes we say things and we either realize or maybe don't realize that that was hurtful to the other person, because in that moment, all we were thinking about was our own self-preservation. And sometimes you have to like observe as an outsider, if you will. In the case of this, you're reading my book and you see me describe a particular combative behavior, and all of a sudden you're like, you know what? I've actually done that here and there, and I didn't think of it quite like that, playing like that's how it played out and what it really caused. And maybe that's why, Joe is treating me the way he is, because I've done that rather unintentionally. I mean, I'll give you a great example of unintentional conflict. So this is perfect because when I wrote my first book, which by the way is called Happily Divorced, I asked my ex-husband if he wanted to be part of it. I thought it would be really cool to present our story, which is what it is. It's more of our story. But that for it to not just come from my perspective, but also for him to weigh in and say, well, I see it slightly different, but in the end, yes, we both had a really good experience and here's how we came together, blah, blah, blah. So that it would have some more, credibility to the story, rather than me just saying, yeah, this is how it went and we were great. And so he said, sure, I'd like to be part of that. So I started writing the book and I started sending him chapters. And the idea was I'd write a chapter and he would then give his version of the same scenario. And we got to about chapter 4, and it was dealing with a particular topic that was kind of a trigger point for both of us. And he suddenly sent me an email and said, stop, I don't want to be any part of this. No, timeout. And it was really pretty conflicting for him. And he just begged me really to stop the whole process. And I said, well, I really think we can help people, and I kept down this path. And long story short, I said, okay, look, let me take a timeout on it. He was expressing to me that it felt like it was really imbalanced. And he said, you're making me out to be the bad guy. And I frankly didn't think I had written it that way, right? So I took a time out, and then I went back and I reread my first few chapters. And meanwhile, I actually finished writing the whole book. And then I read the whole thing as if I was him. I really tried to put myself in the place of, if I heard somebody say this about me, would I want someone to say that? Would I want someone to describe me in that way, or characterize me as having taken that response? And it was enlightening, because I was like, I don't really think I would like that much. And we had come so far. I didn't want to. It would be crazy for a book that's supposed to help people to get along as a divorced couple, as parents, for the book to destroy all that would be, just devastating. So I was like, well, I have to fix this, because that's what I do. I fix problems in my life. And so I rewrote probably 70% of it. I kept the general premise, and I tried very hard to not necessarily make it watered down where we didn't have any conflicts, but where I highlighted a conflict, I tried to be very honest and give both perspectives on that. So I get it done. And he was honestly not even speaking to me at this point, which was the first time, frankly, in the 20 years since we had gotten divorced, where that had been the case. So this was really a big deal. And I called him and I said, I've actually revised the whole book. I would like you to take another run at it and look at it. You don't have to necessarily be part of writing it, but I do need you to um, buy into it and for this to not destroy us, because that's far more important to me than the book. And so he read it and he told me when I dropped it, I took over a printed out copy of it. And he said, oh, I'll probably get to it like in a week or two. I've got a whole bunch going on. I'm like, okay. And I got home and he said, or I had been home for like, I don't know, maybe 2 hours. And he texted me. I had invited him to highlight anything that still bothered him. I said, please read this with an open mind. If there are still things that bother you, please highlight them. Let's talk about them and let's resolve them, or I can just throw them out. Nothing is that important. So, I'm home for this 2 hours. All of a sudden he texted me and he said, I'm about 4 chapters in and so far so good. Well, that's the point where it had started to trigger him before. So he got past that 4th chapter and he said nothing highlighted. So we ended up working through it and he didn't highlight anything. And he said it felt more balanced. It felt more fair to him. And my whole point of that is even 20 years removed from our marriage, I still felt the need to preserve that relationship with him because look, even when your kids are grown, you're going to have weddings, you're going to have grandkids, you're going to have family celebrations that call for the two of you to hopefully be able to be in the same room together and not make it terrible for everyone else around you, and particularly your kids. So we got past this crisis in our relationship and moved forward and found a way. So.
Well, that's pretty amazing. Before we were getting recording, we were talking about you're really excited about how you had talked about correcting course in the book. Can you talk a little bit about that and what are some good tips on that?
Yeah, so correcting course is interesting because people a lot of times I think they look at a book titled Combative to Collaborative, the Co-Parenting Code, and they're like, well, there's no hope for my ex, or we can't get there. We're too high conflict. And I would say that a lot of times that may be where you feel like you are, but there's really a lot more that you can do. First, I'd say if you haven't tried to be collaborative, don't assume you can't be. But the thing that got really exciting for me as I entered into doing this 3rd stage of the book, because the book is divided into 3 stages and correcting course is the 3rd stage, was it was provoked by a conversation with a friend who I gave an early review of the book. And he read several chapters of it and he sent me an email and he said, this is great. However, my ex would not read this book. I'd be the one reading it because she's combative and I'm the one that feels like I need the help. I'm the one motivated to improve. And I was like, oh man, you're right. And here I have been writing these combative things saying, this is a combative behavior. You shouldn't do this and you shouldn't do this kind of combative thing. And really addressing it to the combative person. And I realized I needed to put a whole bunch more help in there for the person that falls victim to the combative behaviors. How can you redirect, hostile behavior to more effective communications? Or how can you prevent triggering them if you know you're dealing with a combative person? Well, this friend had also said to me, we couldn't even get past the hurt to think of the idea of collaborating. And I said, I'm going to have to take that away. And I took it away and I thought about it and I said, I've got it. And it felt like really an epiphany to me because I really even thought back to how my ex and I had approached this. Because look, there's always hurt involved in the ending of a marriage, or at least you would think so. And did we apologize to each other before we could co-parent? Did we ask for forgiveness or forgive? No, we actually didn't do those things. We just redirected our attention. So when someone says, how do you get past the hurt? I want to relieve everyone of some guilt right here and the big burden that you're carrying around. You don't need to. You don't need to fix that romantic relationship. It's over. So that may be a painful exercise right there to accept that and move beyond it. But I'll tell you, once you actually declare that romantic relationship in the background, something that's over and that you've already finished, then you're free to move on to what does it take to enable this other person and myself to be the best parents we can be. So that's the big epiphany, is that you don't have to forgive the other person, ask for forgiveness, apologize if you don't think that you owe the other person an apology, and you don't need to receive an apology. Even if you think you deserve one, you still don't need to in order to be a good parent. It's just not part of that puzzle. It's a different puzzle.
Yeah, that's so true. And I mean, I think parents, like like we said before, the emotional aspect of getting divorced is so strong. You forget that really, once you become a co-parent, you've really transitioned from, having an emotional relationship that's, based on romance to really a business one, right? Because, at this point you're dealing with kids and money and time, and it's really more business focused than anything else. So I think a lot of people forget that, and they let their emotions kind of get in the way of actually having that business relationship.
They do, and if they have that problem, they're and it's sometimes it's hard for us to just look. We can't just turn off our emotions and become robots, and we're not all Spock here. So I get that, but focus on the emotions that benefit you. For instance, your kid, your other parent knows your kid. If you see them do something really good on the sports field, the soccer field, whatever, share that with them, or comment on it there with them at the game, or laugh if you see them do something funny, and laugh together. There are still emotions that you can enjoy together without a romantic relationship being part of that. Just as any two people that share, family members might do.
Yeah, that's excellent. What's the best piece of advice you have for divorced parents?
So I'll say two things. One, if you have not considered the idea of being collaborative or being able to accomplish collaboration because you deal with a high conflict ex-spouse, don't write it off. It doesn't matter if it's been 10 or 20 years, even. Your circumstances for what kind of communications you have to have with that person may evolve and change over the time, but you still really benefit from being able to collaborate with them as your parenting partner. And two, remember, if you don't know how to treat this other person, treat them the way you'd want to be treated, because that's going to kind of be an anchor for you. You can always go back to that. If you're not sure what to say to someone, say it out loud to yourself, like offline from talking to them. And, did it sound good? Would I want somebody to say that to me? Or would I want someone to take that action with regard to me? And if the answer is no, then try recalibrating, try revising what you're going to say. And that's not to say you don't say anything. Even though mom said don't say anything if you got nothing nice to say, you need to say something that is a little nicer and find a better way to put it.
Yeah, absolutely. I 100% agree with that, and I'll add that something that's worked, with people that I know, and it is, really ask yourself, is this necessary? Is it necessary to have a communication about this? Are you giving necessary information? Sometimes we want to just, write 3 paragraphs about something when really a sentence or two will do. So,
Right.
that's another piece that I think, and I'm sure you address it in the book, that, sometimes less is more, but
Yep.
you really don't escalate things by adding too much information.
That's for sure.
So does co-parenting work for everybody? What's your take on that?
Unfortunately, no. I would say there are some basic things that are disqualifiers. One is, and when I talk about these, I mean the unresolved versions of these, and I'll I'll explain what I mean by that in a second. But where there's domestic abuse, violent behaviors, criminal behaviors, or some type of unresolved substance abuse, you're not going to be able to move forward with those things still in play. But I want to be careful here because you don't want to write somebody off forever uh, that may be seeking to improve themselves. Even the most egregious behaviors, someone can come to terms with that, realize what they've done, and redeem themselves. And we all deserve a second shot when we've done the work to show remorse for our previous actions and repair those things and try to do better. So while those I'd say are disqualifiers if they're in the present and those things are still active issues, they could be resolved, but the person has to do the work. Otherwise, it's not only going to be very difficult to collaborate, it could potentially be dangerous for those that are engaging.
Yeah, and I think it's important to really bring up here when we talk about co-parenting, collaborating. Those terms sometimes bleed into the legal world,
Yeah.
and I don't think what we're talking about here are the legal terms of joint custody or joint visitation, that sort of thing. But really, we're talking about how the two parents interact with each other.
That's right. And the term co-parenting wasn't even a term when my son's father and I divorced. Shared parenting was the only term that anyone threw at me. It's kind of a nice thing that co-parenting has become a term and that people recognize it as a way to interact with one another once you're no longer a couple, a romantic couple. So kudos to all that have come after us to make it more mainstream, if you will, to find ways forward that are more positive for the families involved. And that goes for blended families as well.
Another term that comes up quite often is parallel parenting, and so I think in some of those instances that you're talking about, where you have somebody who maybe has a substance abuse problem, or they have some issues with the law, that sort of thing. I think parallel parenting is really where it's at, but that doesn't mean you have to strictly parallel parent all the time. I think there's aspects that you can co-parent with. And really, it's just up to every situation to figure out where you co-parent with and where you have more strict boundaries. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think parallel parenting is a good option for, like you said, those situations where there's unresolved issues that prohibit a more collaborative existence of the two parents, and it still allow co-parenting to some degree to happen in a more protected way. But it doesn't have to be that way forever. I think of that as maybe a good viable interim solution to real root problem resolution. Um, but hopefully, the parents that are finding it easier to do the parallel parenting are also simultaneously working on the issues that prevent them from doing more of a collaborative style of parenting together, so that they can eventually get there.
Yeah, I think it's really important to point out that, kids will go through stages. The needs of the family will change. When I
Yeah.
say family, I mean both families will change as the kids age. And certainly the things that they need when they're 4, 5, 6 years old are going to be different from when they're teenagers, right? So it's important that you sort of evaluate this stuff, fairly often. I mean, I would say, once a year, once every couple of years. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, not only as the kids age, but also as your circumstances in your home life change. Like if you start introducing new partners, new adults into the kid's life, if you get remarried, if they have children, if something happens to cause an illness or a disability in someone in the family, whether it's the parent or the child, those circumstances all impact the co-parenting plan, the parenting plan that you've established, and now you need to revise and do what's best. So that's where that idea of being flexible is really important, because a lot of people, again, will get caught up in this. Nope, that's what we agreed to, that's how it's got to be. I mean, even financial scenarios, if someone says, yes, I'm going to pay for college, but then when college comes up, suddenly it was the pandemic, they lost their job, they didn't have any income, and you do, maybe your circumstance was different. Does it really make sense, and I know that it sounds like, wow, you're really generous, Teresa, but I'm just all about what is sensible in the moment, and circumstances do change, and you can always establish some other addendum to a previous agreement that handles the current scenario. Maybe it's kind of a loan scenario or some other agreement to handle even that type of situation. But when you hold on to something that no longer makes sense, it just creates unnecessary conflict that could otherwise be resolved.
Yeah, it's so important to recognize, what creates that conflict, because it could be emotional, it could be situational, it could be a lot of different things. And really just slowing down and sort of observing the situation and asking yourself, where's this conflict coming from? I think can be really helpful to help people realize, oh, well, yeah, I can see how that would cause this other person to get mad and be combative, right? So,
Yeah.
yeah, certainly evaluating things is, I think, really helpful for parents.
Yeah. And I was just going to add that I think a lot of times people make assumptions of somebody's motives, right? You think someone took a certain route, exhibited a certain behavior because of something, but unless you ask them, you don't really know. So a lot of times, if say your child's other parent does something that irks you, rather than sit there and ruminate on it and make all kinds of assumptions as to what they were trying to accomplish, ask them, what were you trying to do there? Did you realize that, or, help me understand what made you go that route with how you spoke to me or the action you took or whatever. And, seek to understand, because you may discover that it was incidental, it had nothing to do with you. There's some kind of other circumstance going on that they're dealing with that's causing them to maybe be late every time they have to drop a child off to you, or not have any clothes available, or whatever the situation is that's bothering you.
Yeah, I think a lot of times, at least what I've seen in practice is, unless they're really going out of their way to be alienating or something like that. Usually, it's not personal. It's really incidental, and I think a lot of people will personalize these things just because they are so, still emotionally connected to their partner.
Yeah, and not everything's about us, right? It's like
Exactly.
everything I do isn't, to directed to you.
So getting back to the book, besides divorced parents, who the book Combative to Collaborative, who's the book for besides divorcing parents?
So really, Chris, anybody that deals with families in distress, if you're a divorce attorney or family lawyer, a mediator, if you work with families through family therapy, if you're a family therapist in particular, or a family psychologist, This book could be a good resource for your clients, and you can read it for yourself and maybe even get some ideas of, from a layperson's perspective, which is me, you know, something you may not think about from a professional sense. And, it just could be another tool in the toolbox that co-parents can go to. And besides them, even if whether you're contemplating or recently divorced, even if you haven't gotten to that point yet, this book could actually reveal to you all the things you're going to have to deal with, which may cause you to, take a deep breath and go, maybe I need to slow down. Have I tried everything? Do I really want to go down this path? Or can I try to apply these ideas before the divorce actually happens or we separate? Because I kind of wish that, I maybe could have discovered these ways of interacting with my son's father before, because it wasn't the easiest choice to be separated parents. So anybody that has a high, or not high conflict, but any level of conflicting relationship in their life. We all have somebody, whether it's a family member or even a coworker, even if you have, and this may sound far-fetched, but seriously, if you're calling customer service or if you're calling tech support, the central message of this book, which I kind of drive home consistently throughout it, is that golden rule: treating others the way you want to be treated. So if you were to read the book and really see how I bring you back to that point over and over again, it can help you in all your relationships.
Well, I want to take a look at your webpage now. You've got a webpage here for your book, and well, it's actually for you, and then you've got your book on it. So I'm going to show that now. And boy, the book has gotten some really outstanding accolades here from some folks in the industry. Jack Canfield, who's the co-author of Chicken Soup for the Soul, has reviewed it. He said this book is a true breakthrough for co-parents struggling to positively interact. And then Gary Chapman, who has famously authored The 5 Love Languages, said couples who have experienced the trauma of divorce and are trying to co-parent their children in the best possible way will find this book extremely helpful. So, yeah, you can go on the website here to buy the book and find out some more information about it. So besides your webpage, which is teresaharlow.com, and we'll have links to that in the show notes here, where else can people find you and interact with you?
Yeah, so going to my website, I have a blog there, which I frequently write articles and share them. I'm also available on all the social media, and I'd be happy to interact with you there. I'd love to have you check out the stuff that I post and maybe weigh in on it, tell me what you think. And I even answer occasional questions that people pose. So I'm here to help. And that's what it's all about, making us all better parents.
Well, that's fantastic, and we certainly look forward to the new stuff that you're going to be putting out, which I'm sure we'll see another book from you here at some point. And you're also on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram. So if you're on any of those channels, make sure you go to Teresa's website. It's teresaharlow.com. You can get the links to all of those social media accounts there. And certainly, thank you for coming on today, and we really appreciate you sharing your book with us and your experience with co-parenting.
Thanks, Chris. I really appreciate NPO having me.